We're going to start off with talking about teaching, and I'm going to assume that even if you weren't here on one of the level 1 days, you're going to know the basics, which I'm sure you will if you've driven these things at all. So Maynard had talked about teaching a little bit there yesterday and last week on level 1 and went over a little bit of the basics, but we're going to be looking a little closer at that now. So first step will be to find your teaching either in the tile or through the launch pad. If it's turned off, it'll look like this here. We need to unlock it for starters and pick a sequence. And you'll see it defaults to record. It shows record there. And so the easiest or the way to use that is, let's say you've been running a cultivator, you've been doing the same steps over and over, you know what you do every time. You can simply hit the go button on your go end sequence on the joystick there. It'll record the sequence, and then when you're done, you hit the go again, and it'll have stored that sequence in there for you. So we're going to start here. I'm going to say we have a cultivator behind. I'm going to name this thing lower. So I'm going to lower my cultivator. We can name that whatever we want. And then I'm going to start driving here, and I'm going to attempt to turn my 4-wheel drive on, drop my cultivator. I'm going to engage a different cruise speed and also turn on my auto diff lock. I think that's, and I guess I could throw the auto steer in there as well. So I'm just gonna go back. It's still in record. I'll leave it here, I guess, so you can see what's happening. If I go back here, this here is what I'm going to press, and then I'm going to do my sequence, and you'll see it fill out there as I go. So I'm going to start here. I'm gonna hit my 4-wheel drive. I'm going to lower my cultivator. I'm going to turn my auto diff lock on. I'm gonna engage my second cruise. And just like that, we have a sequence that's stored here now. Now, if I go back, I can make a second one for the other end. I'll call that lift. I'll do kind of the same thing. I hit the end button on my joystick. I'll turn my diff lock off. I'll raise my cultivator. I'll slow down my cruise, and I will turn my 4-wheel drive to auto. So that one's saved now too. Now we have 2 sequences that are saved, and we can actually play those. In this case, you'll see I'm going to hit my go button here. You'll see the 4-wheel drive, the remote stays on for a little, 4-wheel drive, and then just let me get away from the rope here again. And then I will be hitting the end, and then you'll see it work through that sequence as well. If you're anything like me, and then after you get that sequence all done, you're going to catch on, you missed something or you didn't do something the way you wanted. So the neat part is that we can edit that however we want to. I'm going to pick my first one here. This here is edit up top there. Let me get away from the sun here so there's a little less glare. Okay, that might be better. So the top is our edit button. The one below it is record, and this one is play. So if we hit the circle again, you'll see the record pops up here. So we could simply start right over. If we hit record again, it'll overwrite any of the settings that are in here. So if you totally messed it up and you want to try again, just hit that record again, and it'll wipe out the one that's in here and make a complete new one. But we're going to go to play, to run it. We have edit, and so here we can adjust our sequence, make it however we want. If we want to get rid of the whole thing, we can delete it up here, the trash can with the whole sequence. If we want to get rid of one thing or another, we can select one and delete it. Now it's gone. In this case, the first thing is our 4-wheel drive. That comes on as soon as we hit the button. And maybe I decided I actually want my auto steer to be the first thing to come on, and I missed getting that in there. I can hit my auto. This one is auto steer. I drop it in there. And now that automatically becomes the first thing in my sequence. And then the next steps are always, there's a trigger for each one. So the first one, the trigger is our pressing the go button on the joystick. The next one we can see here, the trigger is in feet, 4.3 feet is what it put in there. So we can change that if we want. In this case, we might say we actually want that to happen instantly as well. We'll dial it back to 0. That'll come on at the same time. Our remote, we may have got it on too soon. We want that to come on, let's just say 12.5 feet after we hit the button is when we want our cultivator to lower. And there's different triggers here. So you could also, the trigger button down here, you can use time if you want. Then it would go with seconds after the previous function was done. So in this case, we could set a certain amount of seconds since that it waits to do the next one. But I find that distance and time are going to be the most common. We could also use 3-point hitch position if we would want to, or a manual trigger so that we'd have to hit the go button again to finish that part of the sequence, which might be some use cases for that, but it's not as popular. The most common will be distance, this little mark with the arrow, or the time, the clock here. With the distance, if you figure out your distance from where you like to push that button, for myself, I always like to have it straight out the side, basically in line with the rear bar axle is where I prefer to have it. That's when I want to push the button for go and end so that it's less confusing. It's always the same. In that case, you would set your distance up to be however many feet after that you need to start lowering your cultivator in this case so that it's dropped down fully by the time you enter that field. And then we can adjust how long it stays on. In this case, with the remote, you'll probably want the time so that it doesn't matter how fast you're going. It's always going to take the same amount of time to drop it. Let's say it's 4 seconds that we need to drop our remote. So something like your flow, your hydraulics, you'll probably want timers because it doesn't matter on the speed of the tractor. It's still going to take the same amount of time to drop that cultivator. Whereas is here, you want a distance so that it doesn't matter what speed you're entering that field. It always trigger that remote a certain amount of feet after you cross that line or hit the button. And then we can still, we took our diff lock out. We want the auto. We'll add that in at the end. And I guess we can dial that up. We don't want it coming on quite right away. And then we should have our cruise 2 as well. Missed that one. We add that in there. We'll do that once we're nicely started in the field. We'll go a bit more. This here is your direction. You can have it so that it only works in forward or only in reverse or either or. So it depends on the application. Mostly it would be forwards, I would imagine, unless you're using reverse station or depending what it is, you'll want the reverse as well. So now I think I've done what I want to do there. I save it. Now that one's been fine-tuned. I can go into my lower one, do the same thing. First off, we have our diff lock turning off, and then we might want to slow it down. We pick our cruise speed 1. We'll put that in there at the same time, and then we'll go here, go back to our, I forget what number we had on the other one, but we'll say 12 feet, and we want this one to be time. Make that 4 seconds as well. That's how long we figure it takes to lift our cultivator. And then this here one, four-wheel drive, drops back to auto. Okay, I think that's really all we're going to need in there. Now we'll go run through that sequence again, and you'll see the remotes come on for a little here. If I do this right, you might be able to see the four-wheel drive, but we'll just focus on the screen here for now. I'm going to hit go. And then it doesn't work. Okay, I think it helps if you have the steering valve turned on if you want to run auto steer. So let's try this again. That looks better. It grabs my line, it lowers my cultivator, cuts mode, and then if I'd actually have my cruise engaged, it would change the speed for me too. I'll just come around the end and try the end sequence as well. So now I hit end. It'll slow it down, the diff lock goes off, it raises my cultivator for a little, and switches the four-wheel drive to auto. And with this here, we can still, that might be a little sunny again. I'll turn around. We can still run our red valve, in this case, up or down, however we want. If we get to a wet spot, we can raise it a little, drop it down again, and it doesn't affect our sequence or anything like that. Now there's one thing to note. In this case, we could have set a timer for a red remote for 4 seconds as well, and just hit the remote as part of our sequence. But what that does then is the timer will be on the whole time, so we won't be able to just lift it up a little bit in the wet spot unless we go like they had talked yesterday, for those of you that were here, in this case, the red remote, using this here, and then you would run this one, and then you can run your up and down plus a constant if the timer is turned on. I'll turn it on. You can feather it and then still hit the timer. But I find for something like a tillage tool, you're putting it up and down, you might want to tweak it, leave the timer off and just build that into the sequence. And then it always raise and lower it for the right amount of time, but you can still feather it in a wet spot or just on the own without having to run the timer. And in here, we can basically build a whole sequence in our edit mode too. We wouldn't even have to record anything if we don't want to. The only thing is, in this case, I'm going to add another valve, and you'll see that it pops up with the timer icon on both of these. So if we add a remote in, so we want to add our green, it's going to default to running that timer. So even if the timer is turned off, I'll just go out of here. You'll see the timer is on. We can turn it off if we actually hit our sequence, which I'm going to do here so we can see that. Hope this was the right one now. Yeah, the green remote's at the end. It'll activate that timer on its own. You can see the timer icon popped up. And that was on constant flow, so it's going to keep going. I'll just turn that off again, but the timer pops up on its own. So if you do have remotes that you want to be able to feather, as I showed you there, you can set this here, guys, that you can still feather it and run one of the dials on the joystick here. For something like a tillage tool, I would recommend you record that in your sequence. You can adjust all the values, but that lets you have a timer in the sequence, but not actually turned on in here, if that makes sense there. There is also, you can do a second set of sequences as well. I'm not sure that I'm really going to get into that. It's all the same. Where you might use that is if you want your auto steer engaged with the one, you could basically have a twin sequence down here without auto steer in it, so that depending if you're filling in a corner, you don't want the auto steer, you can hit the one or the other. Another situation might be a center pivot more. You can actually run it fairly nicely on the go end sequence with your 4 buttons. And the way that I like to do that is you have your go button set up as you go, you drop the more, you adjust your cruise speed, engage auto steer, whatever you all want. But then for end, you have basically 3 different end sequences. And your bottom end can be one where you just lift the more, slow down, whatever you all want to do. And then both side ones, you can have one side, if you're swinging around to the left-hand side, you would set this one up as an end where it lifts your more, swings it the one way, slows down, whatever, and then this one would swing it the other way, so that you can run 3 different end sequences, and every time you want to go, you just drop them more, and then you can decide if you're swinging around to the left, to the right, or just wanting to lift it and then carry on again. So that does work. Something like a rollover plow may be another situation for that. If you want to swing it one way the one time and the other way the next time. So there's quite a bit you can do with these 4 sequences. Let me get this thing straightened out again. If we can. Okay. This here guy turns on the manual mode, and what that does is it now has the hand there for every step of the way. And I don't know where you'd actually use this here, but what that does now is if we hit our go button, let me just back up a bit here so that we can use it. If we hit our go button, then you'll have to press the button again for every single function. So I'll go here so we can see it. I hit the go and it engages my auto steer, but it doesn't do anything else. I hit go again, it does my 4-wheel drive. I hit go again, it engages my remote, it'll stay on until I hit go again, that cuts out the red remote, and it works through every step manually. So I really don't know, maybe some of you actually use that and I just don't know about it, but I don't know where you really would use that. I'm going to turn that back again. Another thing that we can do that might be a little more useful is I'm going to hit my end sequence here, and you'll see it work through there. If I press and hold the end, it'll pause the sequence until I let go and carry on. So if you're, say you have it set up on your planter, you hit sequence, and then you caught on, you actually want to wait a little bit longer than normal this time, you can just press and hold that button and it'll pause the sequence until you let go of it, then it'll carry on with it again like normal. So that can be handy there. Okay, I still have my green remote tied in with this sequence when I don't really want it. Let me go into here. I'll get rid of that again. Okay, I think that covers that somewhat. One other thing I was going to show you here is these buttons here. If you want just a basic, say you want your PTO, you don't want to hit that yellow button twice every time to start it, you can actually hit the auto button here. Now you'll see the lights turned yellow in my go end. So if I have a speed selected, which I do here, and then if I hit the go button, it'll start my PTO. So I don't have to hit the button down here. If I can show you that. Don't have to hit this button twice. I can simply hit this one once and then hit end to shut it off. And the same goes with the 3-point hitch. If I hit this one, it'll put my 3-point hitch onto the go end, and then it'll just run my 3-point with that go end. So it's basically running a very simple sequence. And for something, depending what you're doing, if you just want it easier to turn your PTO on and off, that's an easy way to just put it on there so that you don't have to hit that button twice every time. You can just use this here.